All right, hello everyone. A minute past the hour, so we'll go ahead and get started here. I apologize, I have my camera off. Just want to save some bandwidth so that I can make sure I can come through loud and clear. Again, thank you very much for choosing to spend the next 45 minutes to an hour with us. Welcome to this free webinar from Hobo Data Loggers. Today's topic is using HOBOnet Wireless Sensor Network for smarter agricultural monitoring. My name is Mamadou Ba, and I have the privilege of leading the Hobo product management team here at Hobo Data Loggers, and I'll be your host today. So I've been with the organization for more than 12 years now, various roles spanning engineering on the execution side, all the way to product strategy as a product manager. Also online is Xander, our key product marketing manager, who's also in the background, making sure that we have a great experience today on this webinar. So thank you, Xander, for that. A couple webinar logistics, like I said, hopefully this will run no more than 45 minutes. I'll try to make sure I leave enough time to answer any questions you may have. And I'll be monitoring your questions as I go. Most I'll probably hold until the end to answer, but where it makes sense, I may try to answer some of them. So as the webinar goes and you have some questions, something comes to your mind, please don't hesitate to put it in the question box. As well as always, we'll have this webinar is being recorded, and we'll make sure a link is sent after the call. Yes, we'll make sure you get that webinar, Henry. Thank you. All right. So welcome again to this webinar. For those new to us, we are the home of the Hobo Data Loggers. I would say it's a trusted name in environmental monitoring for over now 44 years. So company was founded in 1981. Our brand, the Hobo brand, is pretty well known and has become one of the go-to solution for data logging across various applications from water, environmental, agriculture, and indoor climate. Our products and solution measure and record critical environmental parameters such as temperature, being kind of the standard, humidity, water level, and a whole host of other parameters around water quality. In early 2024, Lycor Environmental acquired our organization, folding us officially under the Lycor Environmental family. This partnership truly strengthens our ability to deliver high quality solution and impact and make a greater impact in environmental monitoring. So we are excited to have you here and look forward to sharing a little bit more. I put this quick collage together before starting and jumping into the webinar, just to try to highlight the versatility of Hobo products. I mean, they are used in very wide application. If I just look at our weather station from the Northern Hemisphere to coastal research, it's used in a lot of application. And this picture on the bottom right actually was, an unfortunate fire that happened. But as you'll see, yes, the sensors were burned and damaged, but our RX box remains standing. So it just shows the robustness of the product and everything we do to make sure that have a quality product. But key for us, as always, is just trying to make our product as easy to use as possible, which is pretty key by providing quality data. Briefly, I just mentioned about Lycor. For folks who may be not familiar with Lycor, Lycor is truly viewed as the global leader in greenhouse gas measurement. Lycor has been around for about 50 years now, and the sensors measure a variety of greenhouse gases and biomet drivers, governing anything from transportation, production, and consumption of greenhouse gases in general. So with Lycor being a global leader in greenhouse gas measurement, Hobo Data Logger also a leader when it comes to large scale spatially distributed environmental monitoring tools, and water resource management. Bringing these strengths together is really key for us to do our part to help understand and manage climate change and food security in general, which is a big area where we focus in. With that out of the way, quickly, I just want to provide a quick overview. I would like to provide a overview of our product, the station, and our connected product that are used in agricultural monitoring. Give you a sense of the full range of available sensors we have, including temperature and RH, soil moisture, water level, wind, and a host of other parameters. And just give you some thoughts, some ideas on applications where our product have been used. Curious to learn more about your applications as well and how we can enable you. So at a very high level, our product line, I'll probably, this is a little bit of an inside baseball terminology when it comes to onset, but our remote product, we refer to them as our RX line. So those are the products at the bottom left, which is what we'll be covering today. But I just wanted to quickly highlight that we do have a line of Bluetooth devices that are relatively small, compact, weatherproof for agricultural application. We also have some that are for water application that are waterproof. We have a very neat feature whereas you use our app, it allows you to push the data to the cloud. In indoor type applications, we have a gateway that's Ethernet and Wi-Fi, but it is not weatherproof, so that's why it's only used in indoor application. But that also allows you to push the data to the cloud. So what's neat is if you have some of our remote environmental monitoring and you have some of our indoor climate monitoring and lower end products, you have a way to push all that data to the cloud and have a single point to manage your data, be able to visualize it, and also take advantage of all the great tools the cloud provides. Anything from exporting your data to pulling the data out of our system with push APIs, and also recently with our release of our next generation HOBOlink software, which is now on Lycor Cloud. We also have, enterprise options as well, which we didn't have in the past. So as I say, today I'll mostly be focusing on our RX product. So quick overview. There are three main key pieces to the RX product. So we have our wireless sensors that I'll be touching on extensively. Then we have our station that also act like a gateway and a weather station in general. So you have the option of having your sensors at the station, and then to spatially distribute additional sensors around your system. And they're all a la carte, and I'll give some example. The data is pushed to the cloud on Lycor Cloud, and then it is all on desktop, phone, laptop, and you also have the ability to push this into a third-party system if you so choose. So I'll start with the stations, which act pretty much like your gateway, your hub, give you a sense of the options we have. As you may be familiar, if you're familiar with our product, our way of selling, our business model, we sell a la carte. We allow you to pick and choose what you need from us. And so we don't necessarily put you into a bundle where there are products you must have. Depending on if you want to get your data remotely or on site, we have various options. And from there, depending on your parameters of interest, you just pick and select which parameters you want, and we'll step through that. But I'll focus mostly on our remote solution, the RX sensors. I'll call it, we have a good, better, best option. So on the lower end, and these smart sensors are pretty much your environmental monitoring sensors that you can plug directly on the station. Cables can be as long as 100 meters. And then you have the option of plugging in up to 5. And I'll tell you a little bit more about what those options are. The second option we have is same thing, where you can have 5 biomet sensors, but also you have the option of putting a water level sensor. And the water level sensor gives you option on range, cable length. Cable can go down all the way to 500 meters. And classic application for this is you have a farm, you have a well, you have a water level sensor at the well, and then you're able to take advantage of the weather parameters. So it is a very neat and very helpful tool. I mentioned earlier the wireless sensors. So we have two options to be able to access your wireless sensors. We have the RX2105 and 06. And by the way, I should have mentioned on these RX2100 families, you'll notice two part numbers. So we have the option where you can have rechargeable batteries with the integrated solar panel, and those will operate down to -20C. And then we have the option of using non-rechargeable lithium batteries, which is the different SKU. And those will allow your system to operate down to -40C, depending on the environment you're in. But coming back, if you want to use our wireless sensors, these are your main options. This one comes pre-configured with this root manager that acts almost like a sync node to allow you, or a gateway to allow you to get access to that data. The RX3000 kind of gives you the flexibility. It comes pre-configured with 10 slots for biomet sensors, but then we give you these two slots. We refer them as flex module. So you can either add the module that allows you to talk to the wireless sensors, or a module that allows you to have a water level sensor. And the other two options are, let's say if you have some sensors with analog outputs we may not support, then this analog sensor, this analog module allows you to use those sensors with our system. We don't do a lot of controls, but we do have a module that has 3 relays that you can use to activate, let's say, a pump. Let's say a classic example is you have a sensor in the field, you set an alarm threshold, let's say it's a soil moisture sensor, you set a level, let's say if it gets below 20% soil moisture, you want to trigger your irrigation, and then you can use this relay contact. Essentially, it would just close the relay to activate your pump. So that's one example. A little bit more on the product specification. Again, we'll make sure you have the recording, so I don't want to force you to try to look at it all the way, but I've just highlighted the key ones. Again, coming back on the RX2100, the two options, what's key there is what's the low temp that you expect your device will see. Again, one of them comes with integrated solar panel. And because going back, as I was mentioning, our products are relatively flexible, are used in a wide variety of application. We actually have to recharge your battery. We also have the optional AC power adapter. So this device comes with the AC plug, so that if you, let's say, using it in a greenhouse, for example, where you have access to an AC plug, you can actually use it to power your device. Tons of memory. You can, on the RX2100, you can store up to 1 million data point, and on the RX3000, it's double that. And the RX3000 does have a bigger battery, and it also allows you to add a power source of a higher voltage. So, for example, sometimes depending on where the locations are, if having solar access is an issue, a classic example is using, for example, a car battery to recharge our RX3000. So that's an example as well of this use. So going more into the sensors. So the sensors, we have two, as I mentioned earlier. We have what we refer to as our smart wired sensors, and the second option being the wireless sensors. There's parity for most of the parameters that we offer. So on the biomet sensors, anywhere from temperature, RH, light, and wind speed and direction and rain. So you'll notice you'll have those options across both sides. Then we also have those analog inputs that I showed earlier. We have them both for the wired and wireless option. Where things tend to differ a little bit on the wireless side is we have a larger option of soil moisture sensors, and it comes down to agricultural application where microclimates and different soil type can come in play, and I'll talk through those options. And again, going back to the box, we have the option to plug in sensors, and some of the option it allows you to do is actually in indoor applications is to get a sense of energy use, which is a pretty large application for us actually. But I'll expand a little bit more on the wireless sensors. So as I mentioned briefly earlier, let's say you today you have a weather station, you have one of our RX 3000 with your your weather parameters, and you want to expand it to add the wireless sensors. So what you would do is actually you would just get one of these RX manager. We refer to them as RX manager, but they essentially act like your main gateway or maybe a sync node. They become the node where all the sensor data converges. It sends all traffic to the network and receives all the information from the network so that it actually pushes that data into the station, and the station truly acts like that gateway. That's where the cellular device is and can push the data to the cloud. So this is an add-on, something you can do, at any time. If you had an RX 3000 today without wireless sensors, all you would need to purchase from us is this device and whichever wireless sensors you need. Now the RX 2106 comes pre-configured with this route manager or this RX manager, so it comes pre-configured with it. So going into just a high-level summary of some of the wireless features. A couple things I just wanted to highlight is around the range and reliability of the system. So it is based on a mesh network, which essentially means it just gives you multiple paths to come back to the main device. That redundancy and having those multiple paths is actually what makes the network stable and reliable. Each of these nodes, they act as a transceiver. So each of these nodes, you will have a sensor attached to it. But not only is that sensor, that node measuring the parameter of interest, but it also acts like a transceiver. So it relays the data back. And that data, let's say if you're at the extreme, that data can jump up to 5 times from these sensors to make it back to the main route. Now that said, there's always a tendency, or because the data can hop up to 5 times, there's just a tendency to want to maximize that range, meaning to extrapolate, taking a 10,000 feet radius, just give your data one path to get back. Now that can work in most applications, but as I mentioned a minute ago, really what makes the system reliable, the mesh network in general, is ensuring you have redundancies, giving the data multiple options to get back to the main gateway. That's what makes it a strong system. So I want you to keep that in mind as you are thinking about adopting this technology. The frequency is a sub-gigahertz range, and why it matters is it actually gives you longer transmission range as compared to 2.4 gigahertz, for example. And that said, we've made sure that it is a pretty simple device sensor to use. It is self-configuring. How the data gets back to the gateway is handled by the system, and all you need to do is push a button to join the system, and that's all it takes. So essentially, I like to compare to it as pairing, your headphones, to your phone or something like that. So it's almost like just Bluetooth pairing, and we'll sometimes refer to this as join mode. We'll make sure you have some of this information on the spec, but you have plenty of memory. You can log as fast as once a minute and as slow as once every 18 hours, and that depends on what data plans you use. And again, I'm going back to the batteries. It just depends on the environment you want to deploy these. So we sell them by default with rechargeable batteries, and those are nickel metal hydride batteries. But if you are using them in a cold environment that will get below -25°C, then you may want to consider using lithium batteries for that. So this gives you a sense of the options that we have, and I'll start to touch a little bit more into the details. So let's say if you're interested in measuring temperature in a greenhouse, for example, for frost monitoring, One of the options we have is we have this wireless temperature sensor, and it is pretty relatively accurate. A lot of our products, since they use in many applications, they tend to be research grade. So on the narrower end, from 0 to 70 C, it is 0.2 degrees C accurate. On the outer edges, it is more like 2.25. Relative humidity is about 2.5% accurate, with a maximum of 3.5% if you include hysteresis. And again, we have a power sensor, we have a solar radiation, wind speed and direction. So where, hilly areas, rolling hills, wherever there is climate concern, these really allow you, or different soil type, this really allows you, to have all your bases covered. So I would say, grouping the sensors, I would say we have one, these biomet sensors. So anything, I like to say anything you care about, looking at the window, how cold, how windy, how rainy, that type of information. Next, we have the soil moisture sensors. And these soil moisture sensors, we have various options. We have options that only provide the volumetric water content. So let's say if you look at a volume of 1.3 liters, what percentage of it is water? So that's what these offer. And these are, for lack of a better word, put it on the lower end. On the mid-range, you have volumetric water content and temperature, and we have two options for them. So we have a multi-depth option that I'll share an example on how it is generally used. And we have the volumetric water. We have on the higher end, we have one that does volumetric water content, temperature, and electrical conductivity. And EC is important in some application, especially as it gives you a sense of salinity, of the soil. So I wanted just to share, I guess I'll call it a simple yet effective tool, or irrigation tool. So a lot of our users today in agriculture, they use this multi-depth soil moisture sensor to help them determine when their crop needs water, and to improve irrigation planning by looking at how the moisture level changes. So that soil moisture data can be viewed for planning or estimating when you'll next have to water your crops. Perhaps you want to spray some pesticide and need to verify you can hold off on watering for a long enough time to not dilute the spray application, for example. Soil moisture thresholds can also be set for alert notification. As I was mentioning earlier in the example of a relay, let's say you can set a threshold. Once that soil moisture gets below 20%, depending on what type of crop you have, you want to get that notification to your phone or email, or activate a relay. And all those are pretty easy to set up using our cloud software. Just to speak through this, for example, so the way to look at it, this is a multi-depth. So every 6 inches, there is a soil moisture sensor that measures the volumetric water content around that sensor. So as you'll notice here, the black and I guess I'll call it blue, they're on the shallower end. And you'll notice that, so at these points, you're getting irrigation event, and you'll see that they react to the irrigation event quite well. But depending on what type of plant you have, let's say you have olives or something. Let's say if the roots, because generally what matters is the roots, how deep your roots are. If your roots are, let's call it around 20 inches deep, which would be more of this green line. I mean, now assuming, depending on what type of crop it is, but in this example, let's assume that the optimal range is between 15% and 30%. That's the optimal range where you want, the soil moisture around the roots to be at. After the irrigation, you'll see that this green line is pretty stable, right? But yet there is another irrigation that takes place. So again, this is just an example. I would argue that if someone cared about the soil moisture level at, let's call it 20 inches, and the optimal interval for that soil moisture sensor is between 15 and 30%, I would say here you are pretty settled. You're pretty smack down the middle. So I would say in that, again, no two deployment are the same. It would just depend on your reality. I would argue that at this point, there would have been no need to irrigate. Could wait until this soil moisture level gets maybe below 20%, which, looking at how slowly it's decaying, I would assume it would have probably taken 2 more, 3 more, 5 more days, potentially even before it gets to that 20% level before you get to make another irrigation. So just to give an example on how this can be used, it is, again, a simple yet effective way. And depending on how large your farm is or your operation, we can be talking few gallons or thousands of gallons of water that you could be saving. So I touch on the biomet sensors, the soil moisture sensor. The third one that I'll touch on are our water level sensors. So as part of our wireless sensors, we also have an option to measure water level. We have different sensor ranges, and why we have the different sensor ranges just depends. There's always a trade-off between the water depth or the water pressure, because we use differential pressure to measure water level, and the range that you're measuring. So if your water doesn't change by more than 14 feet or 13 feet or 4 meters, you probably want to use the lower range sensor because it gives you it's more accurate. So the trade-off is, the higher the range, the little bit less accurate it becomes. On the lower range, it's relatively accurate. It's pretty high accuracy. You can see here how the resolution increases as your sensor range increases as well. So lower resolution, higher resolution, more accurate sensor. So that's just when it comes to the water depth. But these are cable sensors, and the cables can go as long as 500 meters. So it would depend on how long of a cable you need. So if you have multiple wells, let's say in your operation, that's actually one good way to get a sense of water usage. So I wanted to share a couple options because we may not always have the sensors that you want to use. But if you are using one of our weather stations or our wireless sensor system, and let's say you have an analog sensor you would like to use, we have some options for that. I'm just seeing a question come here. I'll see if I can answer it real quick. I missed. All right, I'll come back to that question. I think I clicked the wrong window here, but I'll come back to it here quickly. Yeah, at the end, could you go into a bit more about the wireless protocol? Sure, I'll talk a little bit about the wireless protocol. So when I mentioned earlier about the sub-gigahertz, I mentioned sub-gigahertz because depending on the region, there are different bands. So in the US, for example, it's 900 megahertz, and in Europe, it's 868, and in some regions in Asia, it's more like 922, 921. And as far as the protocol we're using, it is it is not LoRaWAN. It is our own protocol that we've created, but it is based on the Thread protocol. So it is based on the Thread protocol. Thanks for this question, Henry. So as I was mentioning here, again, we may not have all sensors that you want to use, but we have the option if you have analog sensors that you can use with our system. So we have wired option, where we'll allow you to scale that data and make sense of that data. Let's say if 0 volt means 0% CO2 or 0 ppm CO2 of 0 ppm level, and let's say 2.5 volts means for that sensor 2000 ppm, then you can use our software to scale it and make that data meaningful to you. And then we'll have statistics, min, max, averaging, and then all those options. An example is, one of the products we carry with our Lycor branded product that measures CO2 and H2O in a greenhouse applications, for example. So that's a sensor you could, you could use with our system, for example. We also have these pulse adapters. They essentially act like pulse counters. Let's say if you have a water meter, for example, and then it has a pulse output, because a lot of water meters have a pulse output option. you can tap onto those pulse output, and you can use this device actually as a pulse counter. And using our software, again, you can scale that data. If a pulse is, let's call it, a gallon, then our software will calculate that information for you and be able to tell you how much water you're using. Soon, we'll also have an option for analog with our wireless sensor network, one that allows you to accept analog sensors as well. One thing I want to highlight about this is that it has, for the wire option, the lowest range is 2.5 volts. But for this wireless option, actually, you can use sensors in the much lower range. So for example, there are a lot of sensors out there that have a 0 to 10 millivolt output range, and those are actually sensors you would be able to use with this device. So let's say if I use this 0 to 160 millivolt as an example, it gives you a resolution of 15 bits. But let's say if your sensor had a much lower range, for example, that's 0 to 10 millivolt, you may not take advantage of the full 15 bits, but you'll at least be able to take advantage of 12 bit, 11 to 12 bits. The key there is it is enough resolution for you to be able to scale that data and get meaningful information. And a couple examples are our LICOR branded sensors, or again, as I mentioned earlier, our CO2 and H2O analyzer as an example. But this will accept any third-party sensor. This is just giving you another example of if you were to use, our PAR sensors, for example, in greenhouse application, and you want to calculate, daily light integral or VPD and things of that nature, you would be able to add that light sensor to our system and be able to calculate those values. I think I already touched on that as an example on how you can measure water use, and it's both indoor and outdoor application. So in greenhouse applications, or even frankly in your own home, all of our meters actually have those output, or most of them, I should say. I can't claim every single one, but most have an output, a pulse output option. So all you would need to do is connect these two wires to that pulse output connection, and you'll be able to know exactly how much water you're using. So that's an example in control environmental ag. Another example that I can give is actually, in large farms, where in general, there are few things you may be worried about as a grower, is the pump down and the refill rate. Let's say in your agricultural application. For example, in some regions, if I can use California as an example, managing those pump down and refill rate are crucial for managing water resources efficiently. You just want to ensure that there's a sustainability of that well, because you want to avoid over extracting that well could lead to a well depletion, for example. So classic use, this is, again, I mentioned earlier, that water level sensor. You would have a water level sensor into one of your wells. So this is an example of a water sensor that's put into a well. And then this is one of those pulse output. So this is one of those meters that has a pulse output option. So how this goes, for example, in this application, the user is actually, the key concern is just, am I maintaining a stable level of water in that well, for example. So a couple of key things to look at. As I start pumping water, how quickly am able to extract water and where it's leveling off. So for example, in this application, pumping water for about 2.5 hours, about 3 hours. But what's key here is just trying to get a sense of how fast that well is refilling. So for example, this is what you want to see: quick drawdown, quick refill, and a pretty stable water level. But if over time this water level, this baseline start to go down, that could be a cause of concern. So you have a sense of how deep your water is, and if you have access to water, and then you use one of these pulse counters, now you have a sense of actually, because you may know the water level, but you truly don't know how much water you're using. Now, tapping into one of those meters will give you exactly a sense of how many gallons of water you're using. So I don't have this perfectly aligned, but if I had it aligned around the noon time frame, you'll see from from noon to 4, this is how much gallons of water, and you can accumulate these values. So this level was 10,000, 5,000 gallon, about 10,000 gallon the next 3.5 hours, and then a little bit less than 5,000. So roughly consumed, let's call it about 40,000, gallons of water during these 2-3 hours, which is quite a bit. So for the rest of the, so we'll probably be on time here soon. So I want to just share a couple examples of applications. So if, let's say, I know I just did talk about the specs and how far the data communicates. If you just want to get a sense of, I'm calling it, what can HOBOnet do for you? So this is an example of a deployment, and we just use the map feature just to calculate kind of the perimeter that it covered. So you can see it up here. Key is in this system, we're able to cover more than 2,000 acres. Now, I always like to say that no two deployments are the same. So depending on how high your sensors are, do you have line of sight? If you have no trees, you can communicate pretty far. But let's say if you are in a dense environment, a lot of vegetation, you probably will not get this type of range. So we spec our devices that so long your sensors are above canopy level, and the sensors are at least 2 meters, or let's call it 6 feet off the ground, because the ground tends to absorb the signal and reduce communication range. So long you meet those criteria, you above canopy level, and the sensor or the transmission piece of the sensor is at least at 6 feet height, you will get that 1,500 to, let's call it 2,000 feet from sensor to sensor. So that's from a specification. That's how we spec our devices. But let's say for whatever reason you were able to get these sensors as high as 8 meters in the air, then you'll get probably easily a mile, range from one sensor to the other sensor. So another example that I just wanted to just to give you some thoughts of how you may use this system and how they are used in our application. So this is a pretty simple example of a cranberry grower local to us monitoring for frost risk. So we worked with this grower to identify the spot in his farm where temperature were at lowest, and it was on the farther end. And in this case, after years of growing, this grower just knew that where frost damage was more likely to occur. In this case, you can see that on the map view, he only has a single point. That's what he needs. Pretty simple, but if you're a cranberry grower, especially during the cool season, a lot of growers will tend to get up at night to be able to make sure they're frost bitten, that there isn't, that temperature hasn't dropped below freezing. So with this device, if you set a threshold, rather than waking up at night to check if there's a frost event or not, you just wait to get a text message or an email to notify you. So that's just to give you an example of a use. Pretty simple, but helpful for this grower. Another example, let's say if you are using wind machines in large application, to do like misting in case of frost event, rather than monitoring the temperature at a single height, 2 temperature points are actually recommended. So in this case, this user is actually mounting a sensor at the top end. So you want to have one at the canopy or fruit height, and the other one you want to have about 30 feet off the ground, because it is important to check for a temperature inversion, which you want to be a little bit high to be able to measure that inversion and confirm that the air above the crops is higher than the air at the crop height. Because if it's not, then you're going to get temperature inversion, which is going to, which would potentially negatively impact your crops. So if you're using some of these wind machines to miss your crops during frost event, having two sensors at different heights are very important. Another example is actually when it comes to pest management. For example, we actually, our data from our weather station can be fed into NOAA. So NOAA is the Network for Environment and Weather Application. So it is part of the New York State Integrated Pest Management Program led by Cornell. So for example, a lot of growers, apple growers, orchards in the Northeast, they use the algorithms or the software from NOAA to be able to plan for disease and pest management. But one of the key parameters for those algorithms to work is to actually have biomet data. So one of our devices, if today you had one of our devices and you lived in the Northeast, and we've partners not just with NOAA, but we've partnered with other network on the West Coast and in the Midwest. But what you only would need is to have one of our system with a wind speed and direction, solar radiation, rain, temperature, and RH. And you can use either in this one, we have a dedicated data feed that takes our data and feeds it into the NOAA network. But even if we didn't have a dedicated data feed, we have APIs you can also use as well to push your data, which you own, into any platform of your choosing. I think I gave an example. So classic example is something like this. Someone will have a system for pest management, but then as they start to monitor their system, they quickly, realize that, they have some microclimate concern. And as I was mentioning earlier, even if you had a weather station already, you can add this route manager and be able, let's say if you care about frost monitoring, soil moisture, or if you want to measure the temperature inside your greenhouses or cold storage, you can add additional wireless sensors. And I'll share a few more examples of that. This is actually a local farm. It's one of our test beds. As you see, this is a local farm. It's a mix of both indoor and outdoor growing. All of these are greenhouses. So I just didn't have time to be able to squeeze in a demo. Hopefully next time I'll be able to do a quick demo. But these are how the wireless sensors work. So they relay the information back to the main hub that acts like a gateway. So you'll see here at the gateway, which they have outside, they have their sensors, anything from wind speed and direction, temperature. And then they have different patches. So here there's a blueberry patch. They have some yellow black field, and they have all these greenhouses. And relying on the exact same system, different soil or different crops, and also the greenhouses, they're able to use this one system with the wireless sensors to be able to get the data that they need. So for example, in the greenhouses, they mostly care about temperature monitoring, and it is a pretty handy system for these growers, especially during wintertime, where frost and temperature can drop drastically and fast, especially in our area. So that's one way they monitor their system. Another way this system can be useful is especially, before you around pesticide spray and drift. So depending on how large your area is, and if you have different crops, sometimes it's your crops, sometimes it's the neighbor's crops, it is always good to get a sense of the wind speed and direction before you start spraying, just to avoid affecting the non-target area. As you can see here, this is kind of one example of spray drift affecting an undesirable area. This is a pretty neat example. Another example, let's say if you have a vineyard or winery. So this is an example again of a vineyard. This was one of our test beds as well in Portugal. You'll see they're pretty steep hills on one side of the farm. But again, using the wireless sensor technology, and also we also have the option of repeaters. Let's say in an example, if you have an area where you actually don't need to measure any parameter, we have a cheaper way to allow you to relay that information back to the main hub using one of these repeaters. and they, they have this icon that looks like a radio. So all of these, they actually don't measure anything, but they just relay the information. But as I was saying, each of these sensors, so let's say this one is measuring soil moisture, solar radiation, and temperature, the data is relaying back through them to make it all the way back to the hub. So in areas where rolling hills or hills are an issue, this is one way to be able to make sure your data gets back to your main hub. This one was just an example of a field mapping, pretty large area. So this was an international farming company, and they were anticipating a few microclimate, and they wanted to make sure they had some prevention for frost. But more importantly, they wanted to plant some fruit tree, some high value crop, but they wanted to have some benchmark to get some information on temperature in this instance, if I'm not mistaken. So they did some long-term monitoring to get some seasonal information before making a decision to grow their crops. I believe in this example, it was cherries, if I'm not mistaken. So this is our old dashboard, but just to give you an example of a greenhouse, this is like a classic setup. Just setting up a couple levels of interest. So in this instance, the grower, anything below 40, considered too cold. From 40 to 80, that's where the range I want to be, and anything above 80 would be considered too hot in this example. So this is one way dashboards can be used, so that maybe you don't look at the data, or you start your day, you just look at your dashboard, and if all is green, you're good, and if any of them are red or blue, then you can maybe take action and go verify. Just want to provide a couple more examples. Looks like we're going to be against time here, so I can take a couple more questions. But this is another example, right? You may have your farm, but you may have a dairy operation as well. So this is one example where this user, they have their farm and they have, so a dairy operation, but they're actually using the system to measure their freezers, the temperature inside their freezers and coolers, because they had a couple examples of power, their HVAC going down overnight, and then they get there in the morning and find that all their the fruit of their labors have been lost, and there was spoilage. So they have these wireless sensors inside their coolers. They set notifications, and if it gets a little bit warm, it gives them a notification, and they can go and check, make sure that the HVAC system is running well. Final example that I just wanted to provide, this is actually a pretty neat example that was shared by Dr. Sam. She was doing some work around agrivoltaic studies, and and then this is just an innovative approach, right, that promises to increase land productivity to dual use solar, which aligns perfectly with our mission. So we always work with researchers and professionals to give them the data they need. So in this example, Dr. Sam had about, I think, something like 280 of these sensors. She had some below the solar panel, some of them in between the solar panel, and others away from the solar panel, just to get enough data to get sense of how the crops and how the solar panels are actually impacting the vegetation. So she was measuring PAR, temperature and humidity, leaf wetness, rainfall, and collecting that data about 5 minutes. So again, just few examples. Hopefully some of them resonate, some of them relate. I just want to give you options on how to use our products. So I'll pause quickly and see if there are any questions that I can help answer. I'll go through the list. All right. So yes, we'll make sure you get those recording again. Thank you for asking. And as far as the protocol that we use, so it is a mesh protocol. IPv6 is a very secure protocol. And we've had this product, I think it took us about 4 years to develop this product. We've had it in the market since 2017. if I'm not mistaken. So very secure product, has been very successful for us in the market. All right. What is the sampling rate? So as far as the sampling rate, you have the option to sample as fast as once a minute, and as slow as let's call it 18 hours. So as far as the battery, how it impacts battery, so long, because these are very low devices, they don't consume a lot of power. So for the most part, they're in idle mode. So long you have access to solar to be able to recharge your device, you'll be fine. But let's say if your sampling rate, let's call this about 5 minutes. I believe we did our calculations around 5 minutes, and you are completely unable to recharge those wireless sensors, they're going to last you a year. So that's kind of the worst case scenario. But so long you have some solar energy and they're able to trickle charge those batteries, you would generally be fine. You briefly mentioned energy monitoring. Could you go into more details? I'm familiar with electric submeters, Fawn said. Yeah, so when it comes to the metering, so we have and I failed to pull it up, but let's say if you have like CTs where you're measuring power usage, we just have ways of allowing you to convert that data into our system. Some of the examples are skipping me right now, but anything from, let's say you want to measure kilowatt hours, let's say you have a CT and you want to know how much amperage you're using, we have options to allow you to measure that, Henry. And I'll make sure to follow up and give you a little bit more information on that. In California, what crops are HOBO sensors used to measure frequently, and what type of monitoring? So classic example, I would say, I'll call it like these plants that are very water hungry. So almonds are a big one. And I would say like high value crops, olives, they also use in olives and also in vineyard, because they're examples of making sure that, you don't stress the plant where you want to irrigate often. But actually we have some applications where the growers, let's say in vineyards, where they want to stress some of their plants, but they don't want to get it to a wilting point. So they don't want to overwater, so they can stress the plant enough, but also they want to make sure they don't get to a wilting point. So that's one application, for example, that I can think of where we use. Yeah, as far as, so the submeter data loggers were private label from eGauge, and I don't think you offer those any longer. Do you have a comparable product now? Henry, that's a good question. I am not sure. You're correct. I do know that we've always supported the eGauges, but I don't believe we have a replacement for that. But I'll make sure I double check and follow with you, Henry. But even if we don't carry them, so long eGauge still have those products, I think they should still work, but I'll make sure I verify. All right. And another question that I have is that I'm seeing here is around our, where did that question go? Sorry, there's one more question that I just saw pop, but I'm not seeing it anymore. Yeah, I think I saw a question pop real quick about our Pro V2s, if they can be used in crop application. Yes, they can be. Those are weatherproof. So I believe you're referring to our U23. So those, yeah, we've had those for probably more than 15 years, and they're pretty reliable and robust products. Well, great. I apologize for going over a little bit, but I appreciate you all joining. Like I said earlier, we're now part of the Lycor family, but that said, our website and our e-commerce site is still the same. The Hobo brand is always going to be here. So if you still need to learn more information, you can hop on both websites where you'll get a little bit more information. If you are overseas, we have our channel managers across APAC, Latin America, and Europe, Middle East, and Africa. So when we send out this recording, you'll have this information. Please don't hesitate to reach out to our channel managers, or feel free to always reach out to us directly at sales@onset.com. With that, again, thank you for choosing to spend this hour with us. Not taking your presence lightly, so it really means a lot to us, and I appreciate it. So be well and take care. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.